The American people voted for a promise not to get into Middle Eastern wars, and they voted for lower prices. And this is the exact opposite of what they got. Because you also complain about the fact that tragic things happen. The news makes it front-page news. The press only wants to make the president look bad. Is it about the soldiers, or is it about the president looking bad?
It's not just the president who wants, or the media that wants to make him look bad. It's you.
It's actually about the soldiers, and it's frankly reprehensible that you would make that statement.
Take a close look at the individual sitting opposite Pete Hegseth, someone who accepted the very accountability Hegseth avoids, a choice that ultimately cost him his White House position and his entire military service. His name is Eugene Vindman, and he is absolutely the final person anyone should ever attempt to school on the topic of evading duty. A vast majority of the audience recognizes the Vindman family from the initial Trump impeachment proceedings, where his twin brother blew the whistle on that infamous Ukraine call, while Eugene, acting as an ethics attorney, escalated the matter through the proper channels exactly as protocol mandates. Just 2 days following the Senate's acquittal of the former president, both siblings were unceremoniously terminated, proving this is a patriot who honored his sworn oath and sacrificed a 25-year military trajectory as a result. Throughout this entire proceeding, his sole objective is forcing the Secretary of Defense to finally accept genuine accountability for absolutely anything. Observe closely how Hegseth desperately searches for an exit strategy in this exact moment. Do not skip the following analysis, as I have tracked the complete context surrounding this inquiry leading up to today, and the story goes far beyond a simple video excerpt. Please subscribe to support the channel, drop a like, and share your thoughts down in the comments section below.
Secretary Hegseth, you talked about flexible realism, so let's see if we can figure out how much of it is realistic and how much of it is just flexible. Secretary Hegseth, last year I asked you some questions about Indo-PACOM and threats in Europe, and you had a hard time answering those questions. I'm sure you prepped better this year, and I'm hoping you can answer some of these basic questions since now we are at war. Do you know what the price of oil is today?
I don't know where it's gone as of this time of this hearing, but roughly $100 a barrel.
It's actually closer to 120, 117.
Well, it depends on the index you're looking at.
I'm looking at Brent. Do you know what the price was the day before of Brent, the day before we went to war?
It was certainly lower. You understand you're taking some economic risk, but I would note
a lot lower.
The energy dominance this president has unleashed has put us in an incredible position.
Thank you. So it's $72, and so now we have a 62% increase. By the way, the department obviously will be paying those extra fuel costs. That's going to be not insignificant, but so will the American people. Now, at its narrowest point, how wide is the Strait of Hormuz?
I think it's about 12 miles, but I'd have to check.
It's 24 miles, but 12 miles is actually the relevant number because that's the navigable channel.
That's the international water navigable channel point.
And do you know how many barrels of oil transited the Strait of Hormuz each day before the war started?
I don't know the exact number, but you're looking at over 100 oil tankers usually transited a day, or 120 a day would transport the strait. Yeah,
and so 20 million barrels a day, and right now they're at an 81% reduction. So it sounds like you've done your homework. You're tracking pretty well what the strategic situation is. So a couple of questions. Were you aware that if we struck Iran, that they would most likely close the Strait of Hormuz?
Of course, our department was prepared and planning for every possible contingency, being front and center as something they may do in a desperate state to attempt to,
which is what they've done,
some kind of control.
And I appreciate that. And earlier you told Mr. Moulton that this department has looked at all aspects of the risk, and that the president got every possible perspective. And then recently you just said that the president did understand the risks and had the courage to undertake the endeavor nonetheless, and that's leadership, or words to that effect, pretty close. And so I just want to kind of give you the state of play right now. It's been 2 months of war. We have hopes for a resolution, but the war continues, really. Iran has closed the strait, and we've now gone in and blockaded their ports. 1/5 of the world's oil is unable to transit the strait, and the American people and the department are paying significantly more. And you also said that this is what the American people actually voted for. But actually, the American people voted for a promise not to get into Middle Eastern wars. And they voted for lower prices. And this is the exact opposite of what they got. So let me ask you this. The president ordered the strike. Is that correct?
The president's been saying for over 30 years that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. So he's been very clear as a position. When the American people voted for President Trump overwhelmingly, they voted for that position.
I got that. But the president ordered the strike. Is that correct?
Which strike are you referring to?
The strike on Iran, the war that we're in.
Oh, of course. I mean, he's the commander-in-chief. He's made the calls.
It sounds like you're blaming Daddy for the mess we're in, and I don't think he's going to be particularly happy with you.
I see what you're trying to do. There's no daylight in this administration on this campaign, and I'm happy to stand shoulder to shoulder with this administration.
Reclaiming my time. So let's shift gears. Last time we were here, I asked you if you'd apologize to the mother of an F-18 pilot whose son you endangered for sharing classified information on a signal chat. You refused. On March 1st, 6 Army soldiers, including a constituent of mine, were killed by an Iranian drone strike. Do you take any responsibility for those deaths?
I was there at Dover when they came back. Of course, I take responsibility for every aspect of this mission.
Well, I appreciate that, because you also complained about the fact that tragic things happen. The news makes it front-page news. The press only wants to make the president look bad. Is it about the soldiers, or is it about the president looking bad?
It's not just the president who wants, or the media that wants to make him look bad. It's you.
It's actually about the soldiers, and it's frankly reprehensible that you would make that statement. And so, you know, Truman had a sign on his desk that said the buck stops here. And this
the gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes
from Pennsylvania, Mr. DeLuzio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We all just heard pretty powerful reporting, courtesy of Mr. Ryan, from many of our wounded troops who were injured in the attack in Kuwait. Mr. Secretary, you heard direct quotes from some of them via CBS's reporting. They were willing to talk to the press. Things like they were unprepared to provide any defense for themselves in the unit. Things like we were moved closer to Iran, to a deeply unsafe area that was a known target. Your spokesperson, Sean Parnell, in response to that reporting, said it was not true. Do you agree with that? He was calling these guys liars?
I'm not calling our troops liars, and I don't know if what you're representing is correct or not. I'll take you at your word on that. But all I know is that we took every effort possible at the commencement of this campaign to ensure the defense of our troops, to include moving them off of known bases to places that were not known, and we had intel.
Understood,
intel
Secretary.
Were not known, and then those were fortified with bunkers and other fortifications with theater air defenses. Was our concern that something could
I'm going to pause you there. I'm going to give you a chance.
Absolutely.
Secretary, I'm going to give you a chance.
You're disparaging me that I don't care.
I'm asking you whether you think they're liars or not. That's what I asked you.
You are disparaging me that I don't care about the passing of our troops.
Nope. I asked if you thought they're liars. Secretary.
That's disparaging and smearing in every way. Nobody cares more about the fate of our troops. Nobody cares about the health of our troops. Nobody wants to bring them all hope more than I do.
I understand, but he controls the time. He controls the time. You get to control your answer. And the gentleman's right.
If we're allowed to answer.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Secretary, my question was clear, whether you thought they were liars or not. You don't seem to want to answer it. We can move on. The other part of what your spokesman said, and you just reiterated here, was that, and I'm quoting your spokesman, every possible measure has been taken to safeguard our troops, end quote. You mean to tell us, and I'll give you a chance to clarify, there is not a single additional thing you could have done to protect those troops who are now wounded, 6 of whom are dead?
I'm telling you that as a department, we did every conceivable thing at my level and every echelon down to ensure the maximum force protection for our troops. We live in a dangerous world, in a dangerous place against a determined enemy that can't have a nuclear weapon, and that requires sacrifice and risk. And it tragically, in this case, it meant 6 Americans lost their lives and others were wounded. And we all know that, and that's part of the cost. But it does not mean we didn't care, and it doesn't mean we didn't commit.
I didn't ask you that.
It doesn't mean we didn't do everything
that.
possible, which we did.
But let's be clear about what was done. There were T-walls there, essentially. There was no overhead protection. The known threat in that environment, and I think we all here understand it, is overhead drone strike. There was no protection for overhead drone strike. So I'm struggling to understand how your answer and your spokesman's answer is that every possible measure was taken. We can move on. Mr. Chairman, Chairman Kane, I want to ask you something on a different topic. Folks at home know you're the senior military officer in our armed services. They may not have as much of understanding of your role in the chain of command. You're outside the operational chain of command, but you are the president's and the secretary's senior military advisor. So I want to ask a very basic thing, what you would expect our commanders in the field, our troops to do should the enemy lay down their weapons and try to surrender. What would you expect commanders in the field to do?
Well, sir, I think I'll go back to something I said earlier with deep respect for your question, but I think you're trying to take me to a partisan place here, and I can't let you do that.
General, as always, I respect your
no, sir,
desire
I just,
to avoid it. I'm not
yes,
trying
sir.
to put you in a partisan
no,
place.
and I know that, but our officers and enlisted service members always follow lawful orders. There's a checklist for them to do that, and I'll stay in the
Very
middle.
good. Understood, General. Secretary, let me give you a chance. And you've been asked about this earlier. You said in, I think, your press conference, essentially, and I'll quote you here, no quarter, no mercy for our enemies. That's the end of the quote. Is your guidance that you expect our troops in harm's way, if there's a foreign enemy surrendering, laying down their arms, they're supposed to provide no quarter and kill them?
You denied it, but you were indeed trying to take the chairman to a partisan place. That was General Milley. That was the previous administration, which played politics. We don't play that
It's a simple question. I'm asking you what you meant.
We fight to win, and we ensure the rules of engagements are such that our troops have every authority possible to.
I'll give you another chance. In saying that, are you trying to tell commanders that that's what you expect? You're in the chain of command. It's a simple question.
I understand that. My commanders know exactly what the guidance is with each and every mission, and they know every tool.
Secretary,
every tool at
in
their disposal
refusing
be
to answer it, I think you speak volumes. I think that's a dangerous thing. We all know the expectations. We know the law of war. We know what is lawful. I'd expect our...
That specific remark regarding adaptable pragmatism you just listened to strikes like a casual insult, yet it is absolutely nothing of the sort. It serves as the fundamental core of Vindman's entire strategy. So allow me to provide the background necessary to comprehend it fully. During last December, Hegseth delivered a major address at the Reagan National Defense Forum to present his guiding philosophy, which he labeled as flexible practical realism, and he explicitly detailed its parameters: calculated strategic reasoning, rigorous cost-benefit analysis, tangible national priorities, and, explicitly quoting him, an end to ambiguous conflicts, an end to toppling foreign governments, and an end to nation-building exercises where no one can clearly define a victorious outcome. That was the explicit pledge delivered directly and publicly from his own lips. Therefore, the interrogation Vindman subjects him to at the beginning is not genuinely an exam, but rather a tactical maneuver. He is forcing the Secretary to acknowledge publicly that the Defense Department understood precisely the ramifications of attacking Iran, ensuring that nothing can later be dismissed as an unforeseen development. And this framing was incisive enough that Foreign Affairs published an entire piece this spring titled "The False Promise of Flexible Realism," simply because the critical confession within that footage is that shutting down the Strait of Hormuz was never some unlikely bizarre scenario. Hegseth admits it was a primary consideration during their preparations, and the instant he admits that, the entire narrative shifts, proving every subsequent disaster was anticipated by the individuals who decided to proceed anyway. Allow me to provide the actual statistics regarding what this anticipated fallout truly costs the public, because the video segment rushes right past these critical details. Prior to the conflict, a single barrel of Brent crude oil cost roughly $72, but by the time this hearing occurred, it surged to approximately $117, representing a massive 62% spike. The Strait of Hormuz, the critical choke point, where about 20% of global oil shipments typically travel, experienced a devastating 81% drop in commercial transit. And here is the crucial detail that falls squarely back on the Defense Department. The armed forces consume colossal quantities of combustible fuel for their aircraft, naval vessels, and supply transports, meaning the very same agency that initiated this conflict is now forced to pay significantly more money for the petroleum required to fight it. And I want to ground this in reality because it is quite easy to simply let a global barrel price fade from your memory. So here is the precise financial burden it is currently forcing upon all of us, because this financial pain strikes every single individual who refuels their vehicle or purchases basic groceries. An organization known as the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy has been calculating the total damages, and as of the beginning of August, the conflict had forced the typical American family to pay an estimated $527 in elevated fuel expenses, and it remains steadily on pace to reach $650 by the conclusion of the summer. On a nationwide scale, consumers have surrendered more than $70 billion in excess payments to the petroleum sector ever since global market rates began their upward climb. Mark Zandi, the lead financial analyst for Moody's, notes that gasoline prices sat comfortably below $3 per gallon prior to the conflict, while Patrick DeHaan, the director of petroleum research at GasBuddy, cautioned that this event would, quoting him directly, rapidly trigger further economic inflation, specifically the variety that negatively impacts not only your fuel receipt, but also your supermarket checkout total. Consequently, this issue is not merely a fluctuating statistic on a stock market ticker. Rather, it directly impacts our gasoline, our sustenance, and our household financial plans. Now, I intend to remain entirely objective here, because Hegseth presents a legitimate counterpoint that warrants evaluation in its most robust and persuasive presentation. His argument centers on the reality that a nation cannot achieve major geopolitical victories without incurring a price. He contends the commander-in-chief understood an economic penalty would materialize and deliberately embraced it, framing that specific decision as an act of bold leadership. The foundational concept suggesting that serious international statecraft requires difficult compromises holds significant merit on its own. There are certainly times when a country must endure immediate hardship to prevent a far more devastating crisis in the future, such as an atomic-capable Iran. Numerous intelligent individuals subscribe to that exact philosophy, and it remains a completely reasonable perspective to hold. However, here is the exact moment his argument collapses completely, and it does not fail based on my personal criteria. It fails based entirely upon Hegseth's own publicly promised doctrine of flexible realism, rigorous cost-benefit analysis, and zero undefined conflicts. Well, the liability column of that particular ledger is massively bloated. Those liabilities were completely anticipated beforehand, and regarding the advantages, a full 2 months into this situation during this specific hearing, there remains no clearly established conclusion. The mission targets had already been altered multiple times, and the critical waterway remains completely blocked. Therefore, evaluated by Hegseth's personal benchmark, launching an offensive with massive anticipated damages and zero identifiable victory conditions is the precise scenario he vowed this administration would absolutely avoid. That is the snare he walked into. He did not simply fail an arbitrary assessment designed by political opponents, but rather he utterly failed his own established standards. Furthermore, there exists a secondary pledge that was completely shattered. Trump campaigned multiple times on the explicit promise of extracting the nation from Middle Eastern combats and reducing consumer expenses. During a campaign rally in Pennsylvania in 2024, he declared that under his administration, the nation would experience zero additional conflicts and zero economic interruptions. Yet the citizens received the exact opposite of those promises, enduring a brand new Middle Eastern battle alongside elevated costs of living. Now, there is a crucial detail you must understand regarding the individual posing these questions, because this context fundamentally alters the entire meaning of the footage you just viewed. Vindman is absolutely not lenient toward the Iranian government, not even slightly. He dedicated 25 years to the armed forces, beginning his career as an airborne soldier, deploying for combat in Iraq, and eventually retiring as a high-ranking officer within the military legal division. His own identical twin sibling earned a Purple Heart Medal after sustaining injuries during combat operations in Iraq. When the hostilities commenced, Vindman published an official declaration labeling the Iranian leadership as malevolent, stating there was absolutely zero affection shared between himself and Tehran, yet he still stood against the military action regardless, because his core argument maintains that simply despising the enemy does not resolve the critical issue of what occurs immediately following the initial airstrikes. He is not inquiring why the Iranian state is terrible, since every single person inside that chamber inherently understands why they are terrible. Rather, he is aggressively questioning whether the individuals who initiated this strike comprehended the subsequent fallout. And according to Hegseth's own testimony, they absolutely did. Next arrives the specific segment everyone shared online. Vindman compels Hegseth to explicitly state who exactly authorized the lethal strike, and the definitive response provided is Trump. From a purely factual standpoint, this detail is not exactly groundbreaking. The official statement released by Central Command explicitly notes the military action commenced under the direct instruction of the Commander-in-Chief, making it an undeniable truth. What Vindman successfully exposes is not the basic fact itself, but rather the immediate psychological reflex. Merely a minute prior, Hegseth was gleefully accepting praise for energy dominance, tactical victories, and bravery. Yet the very second the inquiry shifted toward negative repercussions, the combat operation ceased being his personal achievement and suddenly became the president's burden. That shift represents the entire significance of that specific interaction. All the glory flows in one direction, while the accountability abruptly flows in the opposite direction, moving straight up the chain of command to the single individual whom Hegseth treats as absolutely beyond reproach. That maneuver represents the initial path the blame takes to avoid resting with him. Next, he shifts the conversation toward the topic that demonstrably affects him most deeply, causing a palpable shift in the atmosphere of the room: the service members who sacrificed their lives, and he connects this directly to a piece of evidence from a previous congressional inquiry. Allow me to provide the missing background information regarding that moment, because the evidence is heavily documented and incredibly condemning. Last March, Hegseth utilized a corporate encrypted messaging platform named Signal to distribute the tactical blueprint for an upcoming bombing run in Yemen. He did not use ambiguous language, instead electing to publish the exact deployment schedules for the F-18 fighter aircraft down to the specific minute, alongside precise drone and rocket timetables merely a few hours before those aviators entered dangerous, heavily defended territory. He transmitted this highly sensitive intelligence into a group conversation that inadvertently contained a civilian publication editor. He then repeated this massive error in a separate group text that included his spouse, a civilian holding zero national security clearance, despite the fact that only 1 day prior, the military establishment had officially cautioned its personnel that Russian operatives were actively attempting to infiltrate that exact software application. Furthermore, this serious accusation does not originate from Vindman or from my own commentary. During December, the military's Internal Oversight Authority determined the compromised data had been appropriately designated as restricted intelligence, and concluded that distributing it in such a reckless manner directly endangered the survival of American military aviators. Hegseth publicly described the investigation as a complete vindication. However, objective analysts who reviewed the findings stated unequivocally that it was certainly not an exoneration. That constitutes the foundational background regarding the aviator issue Vindman highlights. He subsequently shifts the focus to the 6 Army Reserve personnel who perished on the 1st of March at Cordoba in Kuwait, which is the exact moment these casualties cease being mere statistics. One of those fallen individuals was his own district resident, Chief Warrant Officer 3 Robert Marzan. He was a 54-year-old native of Spotsylvania, Virginia, who originally enlisted back in 1990, ultimately dedicating 3 full decades to military duty, earning a Bronze Star Medal, and he sadly left behind his wife Tina, along with his children Justin and Felicia. Interestingly enough, both Vindman and Hegseth were present at Dover Air Force Base to solemnly receive our fallen troops when their remains were returned home. Therefore, when Vindman directly demands to know who accepts the blame for those tragic fatalities, Hegseth actually replies affirmatively, stating he personally accepts the burden, which qualifies as a genuine, direct response. However, pay close attention to the secondary path the blame takes, because this is precisely where Vindman corners him. Hegseth had previously complained on a different occasion that whenever devastating events like this reach the newspaper headlines, the journalistic establishment is merely attempting to tarnish the president's public reputation. Consequently, the underlying premise beneath Vindman's line of questioning is devastatingly simple. Is this tragedy fundamentally about the deceased service members, or is it merely about protecting the president's political optics? And within the video segment you just watched, Hegseth's immediate defensive reflex is to claim that the media is not the only entity attempting to smear Trump, accusing Vindman of doing the exact same thing. Reflect on that specific reaction for a moment. The man was directly questioned regarding 6 American troops who perished in combat, one of them being Robert Marzan, and his immediate instinct was to twist the tragedy into a political assault on the commander-in-chief's public standing. That represents the accountability moving laterally rather than vertically. Profound mourning was instantly transformed into a political communication dilemma for his superior, turning Marzan's tragic passing into a defensive talking point about the president, which is the exact reason the identity of the interrogator carries such immense weight. Eugene Vindman is absolutely not a passive observer regarding the concept of taking ownership. He experienced the absolute most punishing version of it imaginable within the American public sphere. Both he and his sibling officially reported what they perceived as executive misconduct by utilizing the appropriate bureaucratic pathways exactly as the regulatory framework mandates. Consequently, they were forcibly escorted out of the executive mansion as punishment for their integrity. He accepted the heavy burden of duty, and that decision ultimately destroyed a military career that spanned over 20 years and included a combat deployment to the Middle East. Therefore, when he observes a defense secretary casually push the blame upward toward Trump and laterally into political maneuvering without ever once allowing it to stop at his own feet, he is witnessing the exact moral failure he sacrificed everything to reject. There remains one critical inquiry I deeply desire to present. If the leader of the Defense Department happily hoards the praise whenever a strategy succeeds, yet promptly shoves the critical decisions onto the president the moment it results in fatal casualties, all while framing deceased troops as a calculated strike on his boss's image, then what actual substance remains of the term accountability? You simply do not get to claim ownership over the positive results alone. That behavior is not true leadership. Rather, it is a transparent public relations maneuver decorated with a prestigious military title, and the conceptual framing Vindman concludes with is the most purely American perspective available. Harry Truman famously displayed a small wooden plaque on his executive desk bearing the phrase, "The buck stops here." The Truman Library historians will explain that the idiom originated from the concept of passing the buck, which means aggressively shoving the blame onto a subordinate. Truman's core philosophy dictated that the ultimate leader must make the difficult choices, and absolutely cannot force that immense pressure further down the organizational chart. That legendary plaque did not state that the buck stops here only when the military operation succeeds. It simply stated that the buck stops here. What Vindman is aggressively arguing is that this current leadership team demands absolute credit whenever scenarios unfold perfectly. Yet they demand a drastically different discussion whenever the brutal reality of their choices materializes, and absolutely none of this chaos has been resolved as of this current week. The military campaign Hegseth championed has dragged well beyond its 160th day. The diplomatic truce citizens prayed for completely disintegrated. The economic embargo has resumed, and I intend to provide you with a comprehensive, truthful overview of the situation rather than merely citing the statistics that support my own argument. The massive petroleum crisis has indeed moderated somewhat. Brent crude prices dropped from roughly $117 during the spring season down to approximately $88 currently, primarily due to expanding inventory reserves and shifting global delivery logistics. Yet the actual geopolitical conflict remains totally unresolved, while the market rates simply fluctuated. Consumer gasoline costs at the local stations remain approximately 29% higher than they were 12 months ago. The critical waterway negotiations remain completely stalled, and the military's internal probe investigating exactly how 6 of our troops were deployed into a highly vulnerable, unprotected structure in Kuwait has, at this current moment, failed to hold a single individual publicly responsible. The ultimate blame continuously shifts around the room, yet it never actually settles on the desk where it legitimately belongs. Thus, observe the exact situation we are currently enduring. A devastating conflict the public was assured would never materialize, combined with severe consumer prices, the public was guaranteed would drop, all evaluated against a strategic philosophy that explicitly promised neither disaster would ever happen. We witnessed 6 mourning families receiving folded flags at Dover, alongside a defense secretary who, when provided every possible opportunity to publicly declare the blame rests with him, instead pushed it upward, shoved it sideways, and aggressively turned a solemn inquiry about fallen heroes into a partisan attack against the representative sitting across the table. The individual posing the questions sacrificed his entire professional livelihood precisely because he did the exact opposite. The absolute bare minimum that Chamber owed to Marzanne's grieving relatives was a single individual possessing the courage to explicitly state the ultimate fault was his alone. Tragically, they were denied that basic respect. For the time being, I will conclude this broadcast right here. However, there is still an active conflict raging overseas with significant updates emerging constantly, and I am closely monitoring all of it on your behalf, so I can deliver whatever crucial information surfaces next. If this presentation provided you with valuable insight, please do not forget to hit the like button. Your personal perspectives are incredibly important to me, so please share them down in the comments section. Click the notification bell to ensure you never miss an upcoming upload. And if you have not joined the community yet, please subscribe. Thank you immensely for tuning in, and I will see you in the next installment.